A 5.9 magnitude earthquake struck Surigao City over the weekend, leaving one person dead and injuring more than 40. The disaster happened Sunday morning, March 5th. A 65-year-old woman reportedly died of cardiac arrest. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology said the tremor was a strong aftershock of the 6.7 magnitude quake that hit the city last month. Authorities said the epicenter of the quake was about 13 kilometers southwest of Surigao City. PVOLC said the city felt the quake at intensity 6, while tremors reached areas in South Leyte at intensity 4 and 3. According to PTV Philippines, a dozen residential and government buildings were partially damaged. Power was cut off in Surigao City, but was restored later on Sunday. Classes on Monday were suspended. Meanwhile, authorities warned residents of possible flash floods and landslides as a storm sweeps through the region. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Camry Caldwell.
The National Weather Service on Monday issued a tornado watch for a large swath of the Midwestern United States, with warnings of possible wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour and tennis ball-sized hail in some areas. Nearly all of Iowa, as well as parts of Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Minnesota, and Wisconsin were under the tornado watch, which is in effect until 10 p.m. local time. The Weather Service said numerous severe storms are expected starting late this afternoon and continuing into tonight across the central state.
How long before ice melt affects coastal cities? The Greenland ice sheet is melting and contributing to sea level rise. Scientists are certain about that. What they're not sure about is exactly how fast it's happening. That's where NASA's Oceans Melting Greenland mission comes in. The OMG mission will help scientists put a more precise timeline on sea level rise. They're focusing their attention on Greenland because its ice sheet is the largest global contributor to rising seas. If the entire Greenland ice sheet melts, sea level would rise by an estimated 20 feet. That's enough to flood or submerge much of the world's coasts. Global warming has caused ocean temperatures around Greenland to increase. The OMG project is measuring the effects of that warm water on ice melt. When data collections wrap up in 2020, NASA scientists will be able to project the rate of sea level rise forward to 2100. Those projections could help coastal communities plan for sea level rise. It could also be a wake-up call for governments that aren't prepared to deal with consequences, like soil and water contamination, flooding, and wildlife displacement.
As President Trump announced the new and improved travel restrictions for refugees, the Homeland Security was briefing members of Congress on a related subject. On Monday, congressional sources told Reuters that the FBI is investigating 300 people who were admitted into the United States as refugees as part of 1,000 counterterrorism investigations involving the Islamic State. According to the sources, the Department of Homeland Security officials did not provide any details about the investigations or of their current immigration status of those being investigated.
A family of refugees from Afghanistan was detained by immigration officials at Los Angeles International Airport last week, even though they had valid visas. Public counsel attorney Talia Inlander, who is part of a team of lawyers representing the family, said that the family would be released Monday. The couple and their children were granted special immigrant visas in return for work the father performed for the U.S. government in Afghanistan. However, upon arrival in Los Angeles on Thursday, they were detained by agents of U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
During a speech Monday, Ben Carson, the newly confirmed Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, referred to slaves as immigrants. While speaking to HUD employees in Washington, D.C., Carson said at one point, there were other immigrants who came here in the bottom of slave ships, worked even longer, even harder for less. He then added they too had a dream that one day their sons, daughters, and grandsons might pursue prosperity and happiness in this land. Soon after the comments were made, the former GOP presidential candidate became a top trending topic on Twitter, with many expressing anger over his remark.
Iran has made use of an advanced missile system delivered by Russia. The announcement on March 4th has been a long time coming. Back in 2007, Iran purchased the S-300 missile system from Russia for $800 million. Iran claims the missile system would help protect its nuclear facilities, which Israel had threatened to bomb. For the next 9 years, Russia had stalled on delivering the weapons due to persistent opposition from Israel and the US. But after an international deal limited Iran's power in 2016, several sanctions against the Middle Eastern country were lifted. The S-300 is an advanced missile system capable of striking multiple targets simultaneously with a range of roughly 125 miles. On March 4th, the government announced that it had successfully tested the system in a remote desert location. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Rachel Latham.
North Korea fired missiles into the sea toward Japan on Monday, March 6th. Pyongyang launched 4 missiles from a long-range launch facility near its northern border with China. 3 of the missiles flew approximately 600 miles before falling into Japanese waters, but according to Reuters, the South Korean military said the missiles were likely not long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. Pyongyang has test-launched several missiles of various ranges in recent months. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said the launch on Monday was a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions and, quote, an extremely dangerous action. According to Reuters, South Korea's acting president Hwang Kyo-ahng said the launch was a direct challenge to the international community. The United States and South Korea perform military drills at the countries call routine, but according to the Associated Press, Monday's launches appeared to be a reaction to the drills, which Pyongyang considers preparation for invasion. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Gabrielle Caldwell.
CNN reports that the Supreme Court on Monday sent a case involving a transgender high school student back to lower court, a temporary setback for the student. Monday's announcement vacates a lower court's decision in the case of Gavin Grimm, a Virginia student who is seeking to use school bathrooms that align with his gender identity. Monday's decision means that the case will go back to a court of appeals and likely removes the possibility that the Supreme Court will hear it this term. The decision comes in the wake of a change in policy by the Trump administration, which last month revoked the Obama administration's guidance on protections for transgender students in public schools.
Pakistan has rethought its border closure after a slew of violent attacks. In February, Pakistan closed its primary border crossings with Afghanistan. In the time since, a number of attacks from extremists have claimed the lives of dozens. Both the Taliban and ISIS, 2 of the most active extremist groups in the area, have claimed attacks. The Pakistani military said on March 6th that over the weekend, clashes led to 15 deaths. In response, Pakistan has decided to temporarily reopen the 2 popular border crossings at Torkham and Chaman. The 2 crossings will open on March 7th and 8th. The issue is just the latest flare in tension between Afghanistan and Pakistan. According to the Associated Press, the 2 countries have, for a long time, accused the other of ignoring militants in border areas. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Rachel Latham.
North Korea's state news agency KCNA reported that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un supervised the country's weekend ballistic missile launches. The report called the test a drill of the Army's Hwasong artillery units, part of a strategic force tasked to strike the bases of the U.S. imperialist aggressor forces in Japan in contingency. Military authorities in South Korea, Japan, and the United States all confirmed the launch of 4 projectiles, which traveled almost 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles, toward the Sea of Japan, also known as the East Sea. One U.S. official said they were intermediate-range missiles. 3 landed inside Japan's exclusive economic zone, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said, which extends 200 nautical miles from its coastline, according to international maritime law. Abe said Monday the launch was a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions.
Content on Facebook that may be falsified is now being marked with a disputed tag. Last December, Facebook vowed to crack down on fake news, joining forces with fact-checkers like Snopes, ABC News, and PolitiFact to police content on the platform. In order to flag a story as disputed on Facebook, a user must report it, or Facebook's algorithm must detect it. Once it's reviewed by fact-checkers, the story will be marked accordingly.
At least 110 Somalis died from hunger and diarrhea within a 48-hour time frame due to drought. The deaths come just days after Somalia's newly elected president declared a national disaster due to widespread drought. Now, aid organizations say more needs to be done to prevent a full-blown famine. As of February, more than 6.2 million people were affected by Somalia's drought. The UN says it needs at least $4.4 billion by the end of March to prevent a hunger catastrophe in Somalia, as well as South Sudan, Nigeria, and Yemen. Since 2000, there's been only one major famine, and it was centered in Somalia. More than 250,000 people died, more than half were children under the age of 5.
Gambian President Adama Barrow has pardoned 98 prisoners, most of them from the country's infamous Mile 2 prison. Adama Barrow won election in December against former longtime President Yahya Jammeh. Jammeh refused to acknowledge defeat and is now in exile in Equatorial Guinea after being threatened with intervention by a coalition of West African troops. According to Reuters, rights groups say Jammeh had his opponents and critics imprisoned and tortured in Mile 2 prison during his long tenure as president. Newsweek reports Barrow has also fired and arrested the former head of prisons under Jammeh. The now ex-official held the position since 1997 and allegedly oversaw the torture of Jammeh's opponents. Barrow also pardoned and released at least 170 prisoners in February on the day of his swearing-in ceremony and anniversary of Gambia's independence. Reuters reports a spokesman for the Interior Ministry said, quote, "The releases are part of the prison's reform agenda." For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
In most states, gun stores don't have to beef up security, like locking up guns after hours. But since the government started keeping track in 2012, gun store break-ins have been increasing. In 2016, break-ins were at an all-time high. That's a big deal because the stolen guns are likely getting into the wrong hands, either the hands of the person breaking in or to a buyer who legally shouldn't be able to get a gun. Several of the states that require gun stores to take extra security measures had far fewer burglaries in 2015. Despite some cities experiencing increased crime rates, there's not really a rush to do anything about this issue at the federal level. And there's not really a push by gun store advocates either. Should gun store owners be required to add security? Do you think that mandate would make people safer? Let us know.
Breitbart reported that Norway's immigration minister Sylvi Listhaug has slammed the agenda-driven liberal media after being accused of wearing a crucifix necklace as a prop to promote xenophobic views. After writer and former newspaper editor Sven Egil Omdal claimed that Listhaug had never worn the crucifix before being appointed immigration and integration minister, Listhaug said the left-wing media doesn't care about facts as long as right-wingers are the target. In a message posted to Facebook alongside a picture of Miss Listhaug wearing the crucifix, Omdal wrote, "Sylvi Listhaug is almost always seen wearing the cross now, and she is always talking about how important it is for her. But I've been through all images in the ScanPix database in the period from 2001 to December 15, 2015.
9 children in Chicago are being moved from a filthy apartment due to an alleged lack of heat or food. Authorities say they are investigating neglect allegations. A police spokeswoman says that the children, ages 3 months to 17 years, were found after a report of a child left alone. The Illinois Department of Children and Family Services has announced that the children are being placed with relatives under a department-monitored safety plan.
New York City's police department will settle a lawsuit claiming that officers have illegally targeted Muslims in surveillance operations. According to court papers filed recently, the new settlement gives additional powers to a civilian representative who will review the department's counterterrorism efforts. A previous deal was rejected by a federal judge. The New York Civil Liberties Union filed the suit in 2013 in a Brooklyn federal court. They represented Muslim individuals and organizations who claimed to be targets of police surveillance. The new settlement is pending the approval.
European Union leaders agreed Monday to set up a military training headquarters in Brussels. But not all member states think this is a good idea. Even though officials have said this won't be a European army, some have argued this force sounds an awful lot like NATO, which includes 22 of the 28 EU nations. Britain's been one of the strongest critics of this move, arguing a military headquarters risks undermining NATO. But the UK's sway within the EU has dropped since the Brexit vote. Supporters of the headquarters note while NATO includes most of the EU nations, 6 countries are left out, and several non-EU nations that are part of NATO may be less tied to European security. One of those is the US. President Donald Trump has alluded to focusing less on NATO if European countries don't boost their defense spending. But France and Germany have argued the continent needs to be able to fend for itself. To help prevent it from sounding like a new NATO, the headquarters will be run by a director instead of a commander. Also, the scope of the headquarters will start out small, taking over 3 existing EU training missions in Africa. But the New York Times quotes the Belgian foreign minister saying, "As for a European army, maybe later."
Smog levels have risen in the western U.S., but the source of the pollution may be further away than you expect. Research by scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the Environmental Protection Agency suggests that pollution from Asian countries has drifted across the Pacific Ocean for the past 25 years and contributed to smog, or ground-level ozone, in the western United States. The researchers analyzed ozone data recorded from 1980 to 2014 in urban and rural areas in the western U.S., including national parks. They published their findings March 1st in the Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics Journal. The researchers said that, despite cutting smog-forming pollutants in the U.S. by 50%, the increase in man-made emissions in Asia has driven the rise of ozone in the western U.S. According to NPR, the researchers said their work was funded by NASA grants and used data that's available online. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Cambry Caldwell.
Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives are unveiling legislation to repeal the central concepts of the Obamacare healthcare law. This repeal includes Obamacare's expansion of the Medicaid program for the poor and puts a cap on federal funding for Medicaid going forward. President Donald Trump has repeatedly promised a repeal and replacement of former President Barack Obama's trademark policy known as the 2010 Affordable Care Act.
A bathroom bill in Texas, similar to the one in North Carolina that targets transgender people, currently faces big hurdles ahead of a first vote this week. Even though the bill is expected to pass through a Senate committee, it faces a tough road ahead, with tech giants and major celebrities all voicing their displeasure. Despite the backlash, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick insists that he has 19 of the 31 votes in the Senate needed for the bill to pass. The NBA and NFL has already warned the Lone Star State that passing the bill could cause both leagues not to consider it when choosing sites for future All-Star games and Super Bowls.
The US Supreme Court has sent a case about bathroom rights for transgender students in public schools back to a lower court. The Supreme Court's decision March 6th means the previous appeals court ruling will be thrown out. Bloomberg says the appeals court will now reconsider how Title IX anti-discrimination statutes may apply to the case. The lawsuit was filed by 17-year-old Virginia high school student Gavin Grimm. He was born with female genitalia but has now transitioned to a male. Grimm's birth certificate has been changed to reflect that. However, his school district has banned him from using the boys' restroom at school.